Greetings, I am Michelangelo Maglake, a registered psychometrician, and I will be your instructor for today and will tackle about certain theories of learning in cognitive psychology, such as human associative learning and connectionism theory. Now let us all begin with human associative learning, and it was produced by Hermann Ebbinghaus from 1850 to 1909. Well, human associative learning was formulated by this German psychologist when he was a professor at the Friedrich Wilhelm University in Berlin. And he studied the learning process and worked independently using himself as the subject for observation. Then Ebbinghaus devised 2,300 three-letter nonsense syllables for measuring the formation of mental association. And this learning invention, along with his strict experimentation and careful treatment of data, convinced him that memory is an orderly process. And his research on memory gave him the title founder of experimental psychology of memory. And Ebbinghaus laid the foundation for the scientific study of memory in a monograph entitled Über das Gedächtnis. Über das Gedächtnis. Later translated to English in 1913 under the title Memory, a Contribution to Experimental Psychology, and there he discovered the forgetting curve and showed that the amount learned is linearly related to learning time. Before we dive into the human associative learning, let us first identify Ebbinghaus' approach to memory. And before Ebbinghaus, memory was studied just on the basis of armchair speculation and clinical observations of patients with memory disorders. And the first philosophical approach was reflected in William James' Principles of Psychology during 1890. And the clinical approach was well illustrated in the work of Theodore Ribot. And both ideas produced many insights on the nature and workings of normal and impaired memory. However, others viewed memory as something that cannot be studied by strict scientific methods, and that the higher mental processes, such as memory, were beyond the capacity of such methods. That remembering and forgetting occur only in an all-for-none fashion, or a person does or does not remember a fact, a thought, a name, and etc. Well, Ebbinghaus introduced the study of learning and memory through psychological means, and as his approach to memory, he developed principles in studying mental processes. And he said that it is necessary to find a way of converting the unobservable mental processes into observable behavior. He also said that it is necessary to be able to measure this observable behavior reliably. And it is also necessary that the quantified behavior be shown to vary systematically with other variable and experimental conditions. And thus, the unobservable mental processes that Ebbinghaus wanted to study and measure were associations of ideas and association between ideas. He believed that learning consists of the acquisition of associations, whereas forgetting reflects their loss. And from there, he devised the nonsense syllables as the basic unit to be used. Meaningless single syllable consisting of two consonants separated by a vowel or a diphthong. Cite for example, aba, aka, ada, eba, eva, efa, ema, eha. Well, in all his experiments, Ebbinghaus himself was his only sole subject in his methods in experiments and results. He would learn a given series. This is how his experiment goes. He would learn a given series by first reading and then repeating the sequence of syllables aloud to the beating of a metronome. Tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. Yan. And at the rate of 2.5 syllable per second. Then rate of 2.5 syllable per second, meaning that would be aba aka aba, like that, something like that. And until he could produce the series faultlessly, he would perfect the series of the nonsense syllables. And the amount of effort required to master the series provided measures of both original learning and subsequent retention and forgetting. And his measure of learning was done by adopting a number of readings or the amount of time required for the learning of the series. After some time, he would relearn the same series using the same method of reading and repeating the syllables. The comparison of initial learning and relearning scores provided a measure of savings, and Ebbinghaus savings represent the measure of retention of the original learning. And from this method of measuring memory, Ebbinghaus was able to investigate a number of basic phenomena of learning and retention. And the results of his experiments concerning the relations between the length of the series, the difficulty of learning it, the effects of the original learning of a series on its subsequent relearning, the advantages of distributed over massed practice, and the shape of the forgetting curve turned out to be extraordinary and lawful. Though in one set of experiments, Ebbinghaus measured and compared three kinds of association. These are the forward association, backward association, and remote association. And to measure remote associations, he initially learned a series of syllables in a particular order and subsequently relearned various series systematically derived from the original one. Well, for example, if the original series were symbolized by A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, and then the derived series, or means skipping one syllable, would consist of A, C, E, B, D, F, ACE, BDF, and so on. And the derived series, slipping two syllables, would consist of AD, BE, CF. And this data suggests that in the course of learning a series of syllables, associations are formed not only between immediately adjacent syllables, but also among remote ones. Well, since Ebbinghaus is experimenting on memory, he used certain measurement of memory. And Ebbinghaus introduced the method of savings in 1885. The number and variety of techniques for measuring memory have increased enormously, And many are highly specialized either for the purpose of addressing a particular research question or for diagnosing a specific memory dysfunction. And for his measure of recall, there's this thing called the immediate serial recall or memory span. And in the most commonly used version of this task, he randomly ordered a sequence of digits. For instance, is 478259. I would repeat, 478259. It is read once to the subject, and then the subject is required to repeat them in the same order, 478259. And then the measure obtained through this procedure is called digit span. The number of digits that can be repeated without error and in the correct order, meaning the digits would have more digits until repeated without error. And this recall is observed with the 7 digits of a telephone number. Well, for our time now, we have 11 digits. We have 11 digit span of our cell phone numbers. And these numbers, which both the young and the old telephone numbers users can easily, these numbers, we easily remember these cell phone numbers because we use it ourselves, or our special someone uses this number. Well, the digit span is used in standard test batteries such as the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test. And aside from digits, letters, pictures, or words are also used. And word span, when we are using word span, it is typically shorter than digit span and depend more on the various features of the words such as their length and familiarity. And standard tests like the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test uses letters and words, whereas the projective test, the Bender Gestalt test, merely provided pictures for measuring memory, attention, and recall. Well, the application of the human associative learning theory is that patterning and association can be used in schools, in school lessons to help in learning and recall. Well, let us say that there are 20 new words in psychology. We can divide these words into 4 or 5 subgroups according to their initial letters, which can be recalled according to the patterns such as, for example, Argentina, or topics in psychology, physiological, cognitive, and mental hygiene. And we would arrange them alphabetically. Or we can use association by connecting or contrasting the groups or working analogies between them. Now we will move forward to the next part of the lesson, the connectionism theory. But first, let us learn about the proponent of this theory, Edward Lee Thorndyke. He lived from 1874 to 1949. Well, Thorndyke was born in Williamsburg, Massachusetts, USA in 1874, and he enrolled at Harvard University in 1895, where most of his time, or half of his time, 50% of his time was dedicated to English, and the other 50 is divided between philosophy and psychology. From there, he left Harvard for Columbia University in 1897, where he obtained his PhD in psychology in 1898. And at the same time, he published Animal Intelligence as his doctoral dissertation subject. Well, Thorndyke's teaching career began at the Western Reserve University in 1898. And the following year, William James recommended him to be an instructor in psychology at the Columbia University, where he would teach for the next 40 years. And he became a professor of educational psychology in 1904 and became the director of the Division of Psychology at the Institute of Educational Research in 1922. And during the school year 1942 to 1943, he was named William James Lecturer at Harvard University. On August 9, 1949, Thorndike died at Montrose, New York at the age of 74. Well, Edward Lee Thorndike formulated the theory of connectionism, which is also called the stimulus-response theory. And according to Thorndike, learning consists of the formation or strengthening of a connection or bond between a specific situation or stimulus and our specific response. He based his explanation of learning on his experimentation with animal and child learning. Well, the theory of connectionism asserts that human activity is based on association between stimulus and response. And any activity has first a stimulating situation which influences or affects the individual, and then second, a response which the individual makes towards the situation, and then third, a connection between the situation and the response by means of what the stimulus is able to produce in the response. The connection has been called the S and R bond or SOR, stimulus organism response. Well, Thorndike also expressed different principles of connectionism. First, he expressed the law of belongingness, and according to the law of belongingness, the strength of connection is increased if the paired stimuli is familiar or common or possess the quality of belongingness. A satisfier or a satisfying result strengthens the connection between whatever stimuli were present and the response made just prior to the appearance of the satisfying result. For Thorndike, this is the basic principle that governs learning, and it is also where he derived the next law, his law of effect. Well, the law of effect happens when a connection between a stimulus and response is made and is followed by a satisfier. The connection is strengthened if the connection is followed by an annoying result. The connection is then weakened. And it is also said that bonds are stamped in by satisfiers and stamped out by annoyers. Well, the law has generally been interpreted to mean that if something is to be learned, a reward must be presented for the desired behavior. And if something is to be eliminated, punishment must follow the response. Then in 1932, Thorndike modified his position regarding the above matter or the matters that I've told you before. And he said that satisfaction strengthens the connection, but annoyance does not weaken it. Rather, annoyance aids learning as it encourages the learner to try something new. And under the law of effect, there are certain practical applications. If you want someone to learn something, wait until he or she does it and then give a reward. And rewards can be in material forms such as fish and milk for cats. And as for humans, rewards can be in the form of being told that they are good, smart, correct, and so on. And Thorndike was the first learning psychologist to include knowledge of result or knowledge of being correct as a reward. Well, this knowledge was considered a satisfier because it was effective with students. In the way that fish is effective with cats, the impact of Thorndike psychology was to make learning a function of pleasant student-teacher relationship, of permissiveness, of the introduction of a whole range and variety of rewards and honors. And rewards must be immediate, must be given without delay to get desirable responses in teaching situations. To be able to give a reward immediately, one must be there at the elbow of the performer, ready to reward as soon as the desirable response occurs. A whole group can be rewarded if every member makes the response at the same time. And such group learning and reward occur when one person recites or performs and everyone else in the group is attentive and reciting silently. Well, it is also said that you should not punish learners if your intention is to weaken some habits. If punishment is used at all, it should be directed towards encouraging the learner to try other responses, one of which will be rewarded, and punishing the learner and leaving the situation at that will achieve nothing. Well, after the law of effect, he also expressed the law of exercise. And connection, according to him, is strengthened with use and weakened with disuse. Constant repetition of a response strengthens its connection with the stimulus, while disuse of a response weakens it. And repetition or practice is valuable in learning, and actually we hear it we can hear this certain law all the time. The certain law, the common saying, practice makes perfect. And from under the law of exercise, he referred to two additional laws. The law of use, which is said that the more frequent connection between a situation and response is used, the stronger is the connection. So for example, a drill and review employed in the classroom. You would always have a drill and then review, drill and then review. You would remember anything that you've learned in the subject. And then the law of disuse, well, it is an associative bond that weakens if not exercised. You will forget things. And the rate of forgetting what has previously been learned increases with the absence of practice and exercise. If one continues to practice beyond the point of what he has learned, the rate of forgetting will show a decline. Then in 1935, Thorndike discovered that mere repetition has little value in learning in the law of exercise, and found that small satisfactions normally were as effective as great ones. And in one of his experiments requiring missing words to be supplied, Thorndike found that words learned or repeated were those closest to the right words. In his book, The Fundamentals of Learning, Thorndike explained the change in his position. Thorndike found that practice per se was not effective in stamping in learning, and practice must be accompanied by a reward or by a knowledge of results in order to promote learning. He discovered that in his early research on the law of effect, only the first half was correct, and punishment does not stamp out learning. It only inhibits the performance of learning. And when punishment is removed, the response will reappear. And this is where the next law of the next law of readiness comes, or the law. This is where the law of belongingness sets in. Sorry, the law of belongingness set in, and there are certain practical applications of the law of exercise. Well, it is said that every time a correct response occurs, some kind of satisfier or reward must follow. However, many repetitions will be ineffective, and it can produce fatigue, irritation, and negative emotional effects. And some behavior will persist longer if rewards are occasionally skipped. Well, after the law of exercise, Thorndike also expressed the law of readiness. It is said that when a person is prepared to respond or act, giving the response is satisfying and being prevented from doing is annoying. It is implied that the importance of attention or motivation for learning. The learner must first have the requisite maturation when he or she could welcome learning without the burden of being irritated. But here, Thorndike was referring to a brief neurological readiness, not the maturational readiness, a momentary condition, a kind of neurological teachable situation in the mind. And performing at some ineffective level is not enough reason to institute training. And waiting until the capacity for benefiting from training is at a higher level might be more suitable times. Like for example, a child who has reached the mental age of 6.5 years old is already capable of learning to read. If he or she does not have the prerequisite maturation, the experience of trying to learn to read will be annoying and frustrating. A child must not be forced beyond his or her level of reading, arithmetic, or social activities. Well, Thorndike also introduced other laws of learning. The first law of learning introduced, the first other law is that it's the law of multiple response. It is said that making many responses until the correct or appropriate response is attained by trial and error learning method. Like for example, you would like to study French language or Spanish language. The other law is the law of attitude, disposition, or mindset. Well, previous experience or condition guides the learner. For example, deprivation or various emotional background can act as a satisfier or an annoyer depending on the time of learning. So for example, someone in your family died and you are more motivated to study in school because you don't want to be at home, remembering that that certain person is gone already, and it is your disposition and mindset, attitude against grief. And there's certain law of partial activity. Well, choosing the elements of a learning situation that best meets one's needs. This refers to selectivity in learning. For example, you only choose what you want to learn, you only read what you want to read, and you only watch what you want to watch. Well, we also have this law of assimilation or analogy. Well, utilizing the results of learning in one situation to another situation, where both situations have identical elements. Like for example, pronunciation of the English terms. There are a lot of similar words in the pronunciation of English terms. And then we also have the law of associative shifting, where responding effectively to one learning situation so that the response can be applied in another situation to which the individual is sensitive. The ability of the learner to solve new problems on the basis of past experiences. Learning about past experiences. And then we also have the law of vividness or prepotency. Elements that stand out or are clear and exciting are more easily learned than less attractive elements. If something is very interesting, you tend to study that thing. You tend to provide space for learning because you're totally interested in that subject or in that person. I think that's everything that we will talk about human associative learning and connectionism theory. Thank you for watching, and I hope you would subscribe for more lecture video presentations. Thank you everyone, and God bless.